Hi, I'm Malcolm Stern, and in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson from Online Events, we're creating a series of podcasts called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. My book of the same name was conceived and inspired by the suicide of my daughter Melissa and the journey that took me on and the internal resources that I found. All of my guests will have a story to tell around overcoming and ultimately thriving through adversity. Special thanks to the band Stairway, Jim McCarty and Louis Chinamo, for the use of theme music from their album Medicine Dance, and my engineer Owen Santiago. I hope you enjoy this series, and thanks for listening. So welcome to Slay Your Dragons with Compassion podcast, which I'm doing in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson at Online Events. This is a podcast which has been exploring how people thrive through adversity. What makes them who they are? How do they manage their adversity, and how do they use that as sort of grist for the mill, as Ram Dass would say in his book? How does that make them into bigger human beings? I've had to travel that journey myself with the suicide of my daughter Melissa, which the title of the podcast is based on my book around that. And it's a great pleasure to have today. My guest is Chukumeka Maxwell, who has been working deeply with suicide prevention and mental health, and has been through some really big health challenges himself recently as well. So I just thought we'd have a good wrap today about see what makes all that tick. So and shall I call you Chooks or Chukumeka?
Whatever you want.
Okay,
Chukumeka
all
is
right.
the way you say it. If you can, that'd be great. If not, Chooks is fine.
Okay. So well, let's call you Chooks. So that's what I'm used to calling you. So Chooks lives in the same town as me, Totnes in Devon, and I've been aware of his work for quite some time and the passion he puts into his work. So, Chooks, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what makes you function?
It's ironic you should say that because this week I was back in the manner that I was born. What I mean by that was that I was back in London. And I'm originally born in Hackney in East London. And my father was Nigerian, my mother was Jamaican. And I still know all those properties that they ended up there in the 1950s. As I said, I was born there in 1960. I left. Our house was compulsory purchased, and we left it to go to Nigeria. And I sailed first class with my family down to Nigeria, where my father had qualified as a barrister. Unfortunately, the civil war broke out in Nigeria, and so in 1965, 66, my father was arrested, and my brother, myself, and my mother, we did not have any education for 2 years, and I was evacuated back here in 1967. So
Wow.
that's my first bit of adversity, really.
Yeah, well, that's a hell of a piece of adversity. So you come from having it all, sort of having a good profession, your father with a good profession, having a rich standard of living, and suddenly it all gets taken away from you.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that internally?
Well, it's funny. Internally, I don't really know because I was 6, 7 years old. What happened was that the kindness of strangers and people. So my father was a sidesman at St. Martin's in the Fields in London, the church there. And through that, they used to have a monthly broadcast on the BBC World Service. So he'd always mention my family. So that gave us our connection back to England. And how eventually my father was released from prison was through the Nigerian embassy and the friendship that's around the corner in Trafalgar Square. So the thing that happened to me though was at the age of 7, my hair went totally grey and my skin went totally grey, and I was grey up until about the age of 22. So it was an internal shock, but I suppose the way I dealt with it was to forget it where possible. But it then made me into the man or the young boy that I was, and that would be quite aggressive and quite defensive.
So there's a difference between sort of forgetting it and really sort of like letting it be and moving on, or
Yeah,
suppressing it, which
yeah,
is often causes, as you said, it came out in your skin and your hair,
yeah,
and that often causes depression, the
yeah,
suppression of deep emotions.
yeah,
And also, you'd have been picking up on your own emotions, but you'd also have been picking up on your
everyone's.
family's emotions as
Yeah,
well. So you would have been a sponge for all of that.
yes.
What drew you towards your work with suicide prevention? I found that quite interesting because that's obviously a subject that's close to my heart as well.
Well, Intuitively, I would say this, and it might be controversial, that most people are wanting to die, but they don't know how to live.
I would say exactly the same thing. So we're on the same page with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to that point, I've been trying to work in prevention, mental health prevention, everything, and I just realized that people don't really want to talk about how to do well-being. And in my spiritual experience, I also realized that I too had been carrying a tremendous amount of sadness. So if I'm honest, most of my life, no matter what I did, no matter who I was, and I called it all the different cults I belonged to, no matter which culture I belonged to, it ended in sadness. And so I wanted to get to an understanding of my own sadness, but also really move beyond myself into recognizing, like they say in Buddhism, that everyone you meet is suffering, whether they know it or not. And so from that end, I was really keen to get into it. And even on social work degree and everything else, we didn't spend a lot of time on suicide. It became almost like a stigmatized word, within our professions. So I was keen to explore that. And I used to joke with the mental health lead of this county that I wanted to make Devon a stigma-free zone, i.e., that we could talk about things. We may not agree about them, but at least we can talk about them and then we can have courageous conversations around them.
I think my philosophy around suicide has been that some people take their own lives, and some people create an environment in which their health becomes so bad that it gets done for them. And
Yes.
I'm not sort of denouncing the poor people who get sick with no obvious reason at all,
Yeah.
and desperately want to live.
Yeah.
But I've worked with people who were suicidal, then got then got terminally ill, and then
Yes.
wanted to live, and
Yes.
by then it was too late. So
Yes.
it's a I think it's a subject that has a lot of room for
Yeah.
exploration.
Yeah.
And I know that you've put your heart and soul into this over the last few years, in
Yeah.
it being your passion, your purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ironic, that word passion is a sort of blessing and a curse, I call that word, because you and I know that passion is unsustainable in sense that I want to do things now, especially with what's happened to me of late, which yes, I can still talk passionately about them, but they're sustainable. What I mean by that is that I'm not burning out or feeling frustrated with what I perceive to be the lack of progress. Or, for instance, when I started my real understanding of suicide prevention work was in 2015. So nearly 10 years in November that I consciously was doing that. There are many people I've met in those 10 years who've lost their family or members to suicide. And I sometimes think, God, if they really listened to our prevention message 10 years ago, they may not be in the situation that they're in. So that's the bit about recognizing I'm not Superman, I'm not God, but to keep on in that sustainable, saying the same message, helping people transcend their day-to-day issues to hopefully live life well.
So actually, what you're looking at is helping people transcend suffering, which is an inevitable part of the human
Yeah,
existence.
yeah, absolutely.
And I know that you've been through quite a lot of physical suffering recently, because I bumped
Yeah,
into you at the doctor's surgery,
yes.
and we were chatting about that. Can you tell us a bit about what happened to you? Because you were seriously ill.
Yeah. So I always joke, I'm going to tell you, go back before I get to my present health condition, because one of the things about being ill, I had to get hold of all my medical records from the moment I'm born till now. I think it's about 180 pages, which was a very interesting read. But back along and about, I think 10 years or maybe more years ago, I had bladder cancer. And what we said earlier on about, why I got into illness and health is that I recognized, and I used to say to people, I was very joyful when I got my bladder cancer because I said I had pissy thoughts which I wouldn't let out, and I had suppressed them for so long. And so the releasing of that was the cancer, and that was really a blessing in my respects. So then we lost my ex-wife. She died of cancer, and I became a single dad about 3 years ago. And so doing the suicide prevention work, looking after my daughter, even though my ex-wife we'd separated, it still hit me really hard when she died. And then just carrying on with the suicide prevention work. And then on the 23rd of April 2023, I felt really sort of faint and not very good. And I called the ambulance. And I've really worked in my past for 4 years in the ambulance service. So I've seen a lot of life and death in many different realities. So I called them. They took me into hospital. They started to test me and they realized that I had something called endocarditis, which is a swelling on the heart. So suddenly they wanted to give me lots of antibiotics, and I'm Mr. Antibiotic Man, anti-antibiotic man. But in this whole process, I decided that I was going to gracefully accept anything that came at me, no matter what I personally believed. But what I wanted the doctors to do was have a discourse with me. So anyway, they put me on 450 rounds of antibiotics every 4 hours over the next amount of months. And then from there, they said I had a leaky valve. I had hospital-acquired pneumonia. I had to have an operation where they took out my heart and put in metal heart valves. And then after the 8 weeks recovery, I was meant to recover. And then I got into what's known as tachycardia, very fast heartbeat. And since then, I've had 2 cardioversions, shocking my heart back into normal rhythm, 1 cardiac ablation, which really worked. And then when you saw me in the doctors, my flutters had just come back again. And so I'm waiting on the waiting list for another ablation. So it's been 2 years and 1 month.
How many hours? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's literally today, ironically, isn't it? Today is the 23rd of May, and I went to the hospital 23rd of April 2023.
So you've had a year of real
Two and a
suffering.
half, 2 years, 1 month.
2 years and 1 month. That's right.
Yeah.
Of real suffering. And
Yeah.
obviously, I'm hearing a gracefulness in how you dealt with it. For example, you had to go against your normal thinking because actually you were in a situation where you've got to follow
Mm. Yeah.
some authority
Yeah.
to help you get through it. And what's the prognosis now? And I wonder how it impacted on your relationship with your daughter. How old is your daughter?
She turned 19 last week, and I have another one who's 36 in London. And
Right.
just before this Zoom, she left me a long message about me, should I say.
So how did that impact on your relationship with your daughter? Did you get closer? Was she
I
scared?
think the youngest one became very worried about me and therefore quite aggressive in the way that she responded to me because of me maybe lifting too many things. I eat a predominantly carnivore diet, high fat, high medium protein. She's freaking. She felt that I wasn't necessarily being honest with how I was feeling because her fear of me dying is quite high. And so for me, my illness, I can deal with it. I've had so much love, so much kindness from so many people, but I am also responding to people's perception of what is going on for me. And that can be limiting in some respects because I don't have a fear of dying. What I have a fear of is not living well.
Right.
Big
Yes.
deal.
Are you living well, Chooks?
I'm in process. I suppose what has happened of late, I've just had a bit of a blip, and I'm acutely aware of the amount of people around me who are suffering, and I want to share with them ways to enable them not to. But as I said to you earlier, I'm not God, so that impacts me. So what I've noticed, I joke with people again that I've had to have open heart surgery to reopen my heart because I remember being a child, and like all children, very sensitive and you man up and all that generation. I'm from the 60s and 70s. So, whereas I believe we're all sentient, but also sensitive beings. And so we've got to feel it. And in many other Aboriginal cultures, of which I'm part of this lifetime and previous lives, you feel everything. But again, you mentioned it earlier, we've got to transcend that to really be able to help. Otherwise, we're in the quagmire with everyone else. Doesn't mean I'm superior, but it's very hard to explain and it's very often misunderstood.
So, are you uh, in I was going to think of saying in remission, but remission is the wrong word. But is your current heart situation resolved to some degree, or are you still in the place where you're going, I don't know if this is going to kill me?
No, the heart condition I don't think will kill me. If anything, I've been given a heart that will make me tick forever. What I need to,
$6
it's
million
more.
man.
Yes, it's more about how do I really. I believe that, and it sounds odd, not through necessary suicide, also that we're destined to live a much longer lifespan than we do. I think our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, environment, so many things have shortened our lifespan. So I feel that I've regenerated. I look totally different to how I did when I was ill. So that's a pretty amazing. I'm comfortable with not knowing when I'm going to live or die, but I'm not worried about when I'm dying. So that fear alone enables me to live and take each day as it comes. I call it like each day is a holy day, holiday. And I don't really do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but I do fit into that. But I don't think of it that way. I just go, here we go, another day on planet Earth. And I'm losing that sense of, oh, you know, here we go again type of thing. Like you said, how many hours? It is so many hours, but trying to enjoy all those hours in the simplicity and yet still be in action. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Are you still able to apply yourself to your work? Is that
Yes.
yeah, that's great. So that's
Yes.
still because one of the things I believe, and I've seen this many times in both the clients I've worked with and my friends, etc., as well, is that when you're doing work that your soul,
Yeah.
for want of a better word,
Yeah.
is sort of inviting you to do,
Yeah.
that it brings a sense of youthfulness around that.
Yes.
I am very grateful that I'm still doing work that feeds my soul.
Yes.
And I'm hearing that there's something very similar for you as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the big take home, if someone asked me once if I was not to do that work, what would happen? And I did have to really sit with that uncomfortably because other people would take over, maybe other people would do it. So I have to also watch because of boarding school, because of being a black person in a predominantly white world, this place, and the messages that I've been given throughout my life, the inability to truly relax into life is a curse that I have to be very cognizant of so that I can relax and not project that you're white or I'm this, I'm that. That gives you the privilege to go on holidays, to do this, to do that, to find my own natural rhythm rather than the dictated rhythm, whether I'm a man, a black man, a boy from the East End, a working class, all the labels which are limiting my natural spontaneity.
Well, I mean, you've raised something that has come up quite a lot for me in groups because recently quite a number of my groups have black people in my
Yeah,
ongoing groups.
yeah,
And there is a theme that seems to run through that, which is that carrying the trauma sometimes of being different
yeah,
or having been marginalized as well. I wonder
yes.
if you could say a little bit about that, and no more than you
Yeah,
feel.
yeah, sure. I can do. This is, because I think like my father brought me up saying I had to work harder than the white man, sent me to boarding school to be a little Englishman. But the institutional discriminations and the colonization from old Europe, of which England are part, have colonized a lot of people's Aboriginal thinking. And now some of us and some people, especially Totnes, Glastonbury, places like that, are getting back into their Aboriginal way of thinking. Now, I fervently believe and have had experiences of reincarnation. So I am cognizant I could have been, dare I say it, a white person who has made some of the systems that I am now incarnated to change. But I can't change it through violence. I can't change it with carrying that burden. But what I do notice when, for instance, something comes on TV with a black person that's killed someone or a white person, I feel it. And it's almost like I can't explain it to predominantly my white friends why it matters so much or why, if someone rejects me, it re triggers a feeling of exclusion because of my color. It's not about my sex because people will start to talk about sexuality. I'm like, it's not the same. This is very different. And even psychically, where black people feel that white people are going to give them permission to do certain things and vice versa. It's a messed up world. It's like, for me, I grew up in a very Jewish area when I was younger. So all my friends, family were all Jewish. And in my sense, I have this deep feeling that I was Jewish in a previous life. But as a black person trying to explain that in 1960s Britain. And then I've watched Britain put us into these different separate cults. And I've been to Sikkim and Bhutan. I've been to America. I love this planet, but I don't feel at home in any one nationalistic reality.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of find that patriotism is a very strange thing that we
Yes.
identify with one thing.
Yeah.
I was studying in a group once, in a Jewish studies group, and they talked about the Jewish soul.
Yeah.
And I challenged that, and I said,
Yeah.
that's not
There's no
how
such
I
thing.
see it. For me, there's a universal soul,
Yes. Yeah.
and they wouldn't have that. And I didn't feel able to stay in the group. I
Yeah.
didn't want to become part of an elite,
Yes.
and I wanted to sort of recognize that every human being, every being actually, we go
Yes.
beyond humans.
Yes.
Every being has a soul. Every
Yes.
being has the right to be here as well.
Yes.
And I think so. Getting beyond those boundaries where we
Yes.
define ourselves is actually a really important part of our
Yeah.
evolution as
In
well.
some of my esoteric studies, they say about the Jewish problem and the black problem are the two things which will solve humanity's, like you've just mentioned there. So that to me is really important because what we've got going on in Israel and now in Palestine is not based upon truth. What we've got going on in certain parts of Africa, because that was all named in different, is not the truth. But that bit, like in my heart, there's 7 races which come together, which is the true rainbow colors, and pure white light comes out of us in synthesis together. That's the way I view it. So everything else is really hard. I can go into those groups like you just mentioned, but I have to come away because it's still formed on separation. And that separation is a bit like they say in Star Wars, the dark side, when you try, it leads that way. Anger leads to, yeah, that phrase, I can't remember exactly now. But that separation, it just wells its head. So sometimes my default position when something bad happens to me is to go, it's because I'm a black man. And it's not true, but that's the spell that I could be in.
That's interesting because one of the things I've written about in my book, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, is
Yeah.
about being put under spells. And
Yes.
we start to believe the spells we put
Yeah.
under. So, for example, if a doctor says to you, you've got 6 months to live, you're under a
Absolutely.
spell where
Yeah.
actually you're
Yes.
counting down your days.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think we've got to break free of our conditioning.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of our task
Yeah.
as human beings as well.
Yeah, and so you've hit a really good point there because the other reason why I chose suicide prevention work is because it gives me the permission to go, I don't know why you want to kill yourself. Let me hear your story. Let me hear you. And I'm not going to change it, but I need to hear. So it gives me the permission to really say, and I say this to professionals, you need to have the courage to say, you don't know. So that, like, for instance, yes, you've got the balance of probabilities, but you don't know that this person could live 6 months, a year. And I've seen so many miracles. So that's why as well, if I want to go into the assisted dying thing, is that I don't want us to put people in spells to think that they're always going to be in pain and everything else and bring on their death earlier. So I talk about passive suicide, which is what you talked about earlier about illnesses and stuff, or active suicide. Yeah. And both of them, all of them, and because we separate the mind and body in this culture, really problematic. But in my mind, it's all mind initially.
It's interesting. One of my biggest learnings around suicide was that when I was working in a medical practice in Lyme Regis,
Yeah.
a woman came to me and she said, "I am going to take my own life. If you want to talk me out of it, I'm not interested in having therapy."
Yeah.
I said, "I'm perfectly happy to see you, and one deal is you don't do anything without letting me know in
Yeah.
advance."
Yeah.
And so that's the deal we had. So for 3 years we talked, and
Yeah.
and it turns out she'd been terribly abused in her marriage.
Yeah.
She deliberately married a man 30 years her senior who was impotent so
Yeah.
that she never had to have sex again.
Yes.
She smoked 60 cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
Anyway, one day she came in, she'd had a diagnosis of terminal lung cancer.
Yeah.
And instead of being delighted, which I thought she would be in my naivety,
Yeah.
she was horrified. And she realized she wanted to live for the last year of her life until the cancer became too much for her. She lived the life of Riley. She started
Yeah.
traveling all over the world, having
Yeah.
beautiful sexual experiences,
Yeah.
living all the things that she'd kept herself from.
Yes.
And it took her to being given a space where she was
Yeah.
no longer in charge and choosing it,
Yes.
find that way through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been fascinated about it, obviously because of my daughter's suicide.
Yeah.
It's an area which I'm really, really deeply interested in.
Yeah.
And how can we prevent that? Which is why what
Yeah.
drew me to your work as well,
Thank
because
you. Yeah.
that's what we've got to do. We've got to
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
ways of preventing without saying it's a sin, it's wrong, you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
But how do you work with someone and help them to find their way through?
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a question for you, really, Steve.
Yeah, and so the course I do is a course called Applied Suicide Skills Intervention Training, which is like suicide first aid, a bit like physical first aid. And I've done an intensive 5-day course to become a licensed instructor, and we have instructors all over the world. And on that course, I learned more in 5 days of how not to work with people than I did on a 3-year social work degree, than I did in all my 4 years in the ambulance service. And it's given me such a skill that I passionately believe that everyone should at least have this conversation. Because if you can deal with suicide, there is not a human problem that you can't deal with. There's not a story someone can tell you, no matter how bad. But for me, boarding school has been a place as well where there's been a lot of suffering. A lot of more is coming out now, but I'm involved in that as well because we've had suicides at boarding school, but people don't know about it. And the reality is that suicide affects every culture, race, class, you name it. So it transcends all these labels that we put people in. And so therefore, in my mind, everyone's potentially at risk. And to promote health and well-being, inner joy, inner peace is really hard. It's hard to do it for yourself, let alone for other people. So that to me, it becomes in esoteric terms, is the happier, the more pure, the more healed you are, it radiates out of you. So you can do it without even speaking. I didn't get diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia till I was 43. So I use language and words and pictures much more than I need to at times. So for me, a quiet joy and really positively, how would I see it different? How do I understand that men who separate from their partners and are being dragged through the court system feel like they want to kill themselves? So what am I going to do? I'm going to go in there and talk. How do I understand that mothers who are feeling really horrible through their pregnancy infect their children's mind and brains, not judging them? How do we help mothers? There is not a part of human life that should not be about suicide prevention to prove that we can transcend our limits of old age, which is, in my mind, a disease, plus everything else. That's the soul work. And then suddenly, spontaneously, I meet you or I meet people in Morrison's, and suddenly you realize I don't have to try so hard. Everyone's here. We just need the communication.
Mm. It's funny, you're just talking about mothers. Just reminded me when I was working at the line practice in the medical practice I worked at, the senior doctor there. I was chatting to him one day, and he said, he said, we don't understand postnatal depression. He reckons that 90% of women have
Yeah.
postnatal
Yes.
depression,
Yeah.
and but they keep it quiet because it's
Yes.
shameful.
Yeah.
But he said, some women come into him and say they want to throw their baby out the window. It's like,
Yes. Yeah.
they're not violent people who
Yes.
hate their children, but
Yeah.
the depression is so strong.
Yes.
And I think the sort of like the undoing of the shamefulness around these feelings that come for us,
Yes.
the way we can actually talk about things is
Yeah.
part of what heals us.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And
So
I
for
know
me,
that's
the
the work you're doing
medication
as
hasn't
well.
really worked, but the talking has.
Yeah,
There's the
yes,
relationships I've had with the doctors, because when they've been vulnerable and said, we can't even look after ourselves, I'm like, now we're talking. Let's
yes,
have that conversation about that, because you're meant to be curing me, but you are knackered. You are not being authentic. You are not knowing. I am comfortable with you not knowing. I am comfortable with you telling me about your family. And, and then it changed. It was incredible, you know?
it reminds me of the book I read by Stephen Levine, who is, you don't know if you know his work on death and dying.
Okay.
One of the things he said is that when someone's dying, they are much more attuned to who can be with them in that
Yes.
space. I know after
Yes.
my daughter died, I was in a men's group and I left the men's group because I knew that two of the men in that men's group were really uncomfortable with me
Yes.
because I was in the place of deep grief. Not that I needed to talk about it,
Yes.
but I
Yes.
needed to show up and be real.
Yes.
So what Stephen Levine said is that someone's in a ward in hospital waiting to die,
Yeah.
and they know who can meet them in that place.
Yeah.
So the doctor will come in and they'll know that he can't meet them. So he'll say, "How are you today?" "Fine, thank you, doctor."
Mhm.
Then the cleaner might come in and say,
Yes,
"How are you doing today?"
absolutely,
And they'll open up because they
absolutely.
know there's receptivity.
Yes,
And I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that's the work that we need to do
yeah,
is to
yeah, yeah,
have things open up. So
yeah,
we don't have to be ashamed of our thoughts,
yeah,
of our fears, of our
yeah.
feelings.
I talk about it. I because I teach at the medical school or clinical psychologist wherever I get a gig, and I say to people, I want us to deprofessionalize our jobs so that we can be like you mentioned there, and this is compassionately slay your dragons. And once you can do that, you have no fear of being authentic with other people. Having lived in Jamaica, Nigeria, and all these places, they say that people in Britain aren't truthful because they never tell you how they really feel. And that's a really hard thing. And you know sometimes that when you ask a person how you feel, they will tell you how they're thinking.
Well, I've got a little sort of like mnemonic that goes with that. So you say to someone, "How are you feeling?" They say, "Fine." Normally, what they mean is fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotionally unstable.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
There's not
Which is a
much
very
more on
public
there.
school thing.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I mean, just what you said before about your heart, because there's a piece I've got in that's from Michael Mead, in which I've used in my book, which is about this is about the heart.
Yeah,
And what he says is, "Become equal to the dream sown within us. Our heart must break open, and usually must break open more than once. That's why they say the only heart worth having is a broken heart, for only in breaking can it open fully and reveal what is hidden within." I reckon you've had a bit of a heart dialogue,
yeah,
really.
exactly. And it's a bit that reminds me of that. What was his name? Cohen song. Is the crack that lets the light in,
Oh
or
yeah, I was wearing that t-shirt yesterday. Actually,
oh
there's a
yeah,
picture
okay,
of me.
okay.
That's how the light
And
gets in.
it's ironic. Part of me has always known this. It's like, can I not have the pain bit and just do the joyful bit? And I think I remember going back when I was in about 17 or I can't remember what age it was to be quite honest, but literally knowing that I had to enter into suffering to transcend it, rather than like I was saying, Will just going through, not caring, not 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 really worried about anything, but but knowing that part of it, and also for me, intimacy in relationships is really hard, especially with a female, because I know at some stage they could either die or it changes. So that fear of the heartache of loss is has stopped me from the courage to even go forward. And I'm not talking about perversion. I'm talking about the spontaneous, open-hearted love without the perversion or the predatory behavior. So,
I actually get it. And that's why most of us, it's like to really open our hearts to love
yeah,
means we open ourselves to pain as well.
yes,
They live
yes,
together.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so in suicide prevention, if someone knows that you notice that and you're not judging them, oh my God, it's the most incredible feeling. And even in the courses, I did 8 this week. I've done 42 of these courses over the last 10 years, which is not a lot, but I've worked with about 7,000 people again. In reflection in hospital, I don't care how many people I've worked with, it felt like nothing, and so it's like I'm not expected to get an ology. I'm not expected to get a MBE or anything else. And that inner quiet humility is the sweet spot. And
Yeah.
so if you were to ask me, am I joyful? I'm joyful as long as I'm in my sweet spot. The moment I move out with any complaining, lack of grace, why me? Why did this happen? It totally dissipates. So it's a
Mm.
daily reconnection. I call it God because my name Chukumeka means thank God. I can't undo that. That connection, not in a religious sense, but just in the miracle of life and scientific sense, off the scale.
Yeah. It's funny, you just used the word humility. I was talking to someone yesterday about what makes I put on lots of speakers at Alternatives at St James's,
Yes.
really in my time when I was there.
Yeah.
And I was looking yesterday at that whole series and realized that the people who'd really impressed me, there was a quality they had which was in common with all of them, and that was humility.
Yeah.
There were people like Joanna Macy,
Yeah.
Bob Thurman, who was the first Buddhist
Yes.
ordained by the Dalai Lama,
Yeah.
first Westerner ordained by the Dalai
Yeah.
Lama, Jack Cornfield, Ram Dass. These are the people, they all carry a sense of humility. They're not going, "I'm great," and sort of
Yeah.
doing a big song and dance act.
Yeah.
So
I like
it's
it's funny
really
because
great dialogue, Chooks. I'm really enjoying talking
this
to you.
morning I was thinking of you again because this morning it was Lucy Wincup coming from St James's on Thought for the Day, and I thought it
Oh,
was
lovely.
ironic that that's how to me synchronistic things are. And years ago when I was in London, I used to go to St James, just sit in there and pray. My friend, I think, got married in St James's. So again, St James's, St Martin's in the Field, really important churches in my life in the past.
Lovely. That's brilliant. So we're coming towards the end of our chat together, but I'm really enjoying the engagement and the dialogue and as you know the sharing of depth thoughts as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And the question I always ask at the end is this: what particular dragon have you had to slay in order to be who you are? What hurdle have you had to overcome to be Chugs fully now?
Hatred.
Hatred. That's very good. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So I say to people, I've been schooled in hatred. So lots of the things I've been sharing with you is where I've been in a particular cult and you mentioned that in your men's group or your Jewish group. So that forms separation. It means I other people. It means I then, through hatred, I then empower the seven deadly sins. I then break all the 10 commandments. And now, is to recognize that, humbly admit that I've done that, forgive myself in that. So I talk about care being compassion, acceptance, respect, and empathy. But it starts with self-care, self-compassion, self-acceptance, self-respect, and self-empathy. It is painful. It is so hard when you recognize you've done harm. I want us to turn around, as the Lord will say, from do no harm, do good. So to do good all the time to myself and to my others, and recognize that everyone I meet, everything I meet is part of me and part of God. And my job is to caretake. And in my upbringing and my life before this question you just asked, it's been none of those things because it's about power over winning, playing rugby, being a 100-meter runner. So it's almost like, and that even hurts. So it's like hatred is what I'm overcoming to move towards the law of love.
That's great. And I just want to say, just for those of the people who are listening, often you can think this is too big a step. But for me, what we're talking about is a practice.
Yes,
You are having to
absolutely.
practice this on a daily
Yeah.
basis. And when you
Second
see it
place
come up, you
is
pull the weeds out. In
yeah,
fact, you slay the dragon of
yeah.
hatred
On a daily basis.
on a daily basis.
And we're capturing dragons, our own and other people.
Yeah.
So we have to continue to slay. And the dragon, is something that's very ancient in this country. And as we slay that, that will make our country, our lives a lot better.
Um, Thank you so much, Chooks. It's been lovely speaking with you. Catch
Likewise.
you around. Cheers then.
Thank you. Take care.